Hi everyone. Very sorry I can't be with you. I missed my flight. Bit embarrassing. But I hope this is an adequate substitute for my presentation in class. Uh, I'm reviewing the Islamic Middle East by Charles Lindholm, and it is subtitled a work of historical anthropology, so it seems quite a suitable work for this particular class. I'd like to begin with an anecdote by the great historian E.P. Thompson. E.P. Thompson was asked to present a paper at a meeting of Cambridge anthropologists, and in the question and answer session which followed his paper, he was asked by one of the anthropologists on what theory he based his conclusions. His answer was historical theory, and at this the whole room of assembled anthropologists fell about laughing. However, I think we see in this book that this is a form of anthropology that could actually learn a great deal from historical methods. The point of the book is, as he states, is not history, so some of the criticisms may be considered unfair. However, I believe this is a cop-out, as is very definitely meant to be an historical work, and much of it deals with history. I will argue that though it contains some insights, it would not be a suitable basis of further research, as he claims, largely because its complete and utter lack of any form of context, and that ultimately it is an ahistorical work. It is fundamentally ahistorical in outlook, because it shows no form of no form of progression and chronology. The outline of the book can be essentially divided into three sections. It deals with the material conditions of the Islamic Middle East, which covers a broad swathe of territory from Pakistan, Iran, Anatolia, the Maghreb, and of course Arabia. Then it launches into a brief run through the history of Islamic societies up until the Turkish invasion, and deals very briefly with the Ottomans, cause some exception. I think this is largely to do because they contradict a lot of his own theories. The third section is perhaps the most successful section in the book, and is a section on religious organization, how Islam divided into essentially three different outlooks, or he claims divided into three different outlooks: the Sunni, with their legal hierarchy, the Shia with their belief in a charismatic messiah, and the Sufi, who also believe in a charismatic figure but use it as a means to break free of the mortal bounds of this world. The fourth section is interestingly on inequalities in the Middle East and the way in which people are subjugated in the Islamic Middle East. This is particularly important because the central theory of the book is that Islamic society is an egalitarian society, and the motor of events and of actions in the Middle East is the contradiction between its fundamental belief in equality and the need to form hierarchies to administer the state and to administer religion. So what did I like about this book? I think it begins quite well with a very promising attempt to show the relationship between ideas and the material world and how the two of them interact and feed off each other. It's not just a one-way street. The two do have a complex relationship. And the material condition for all the Middle East, across all the territory he covers, is that there is a rich urban mercantile society, and it is prey to a periphery, an armed periphery. We like to think of these as Bedouins riding out of the desert, screaming, flailing with swords at these poor merchants. It does have a refreshing take on Islam, this idea of equality, which is not something we generally associate. In fact, he takes his inspiration for study of equality from Alex de Tocqueville, the great 19th century theorist of American democracy and American society, And this is quite an interesting take. I'm not sure if it's entirely successful, but we'll discuss that later. And as a broad introduction to many themes and issues in the Middle East, it is well worth a look, especially its sections on religion and Sufism. I think are highly readable introductions into those particular worlds. The problem is, does it all hang together? And I don't think it does. I think rather we're dealing with a deeply flawed book, and it's these flaws I now want to deal with. The first and perhaps most serious from a historical standpoint flaw is its complete lack of context. There is none, really, and there is little reason for selecting the evidence in either terms of geography or chronology. The only chronology we do have is the narrative of states in Islam, but even then he draws from too wide a basis to be of much use. There's little connection or development. In terms of geography, when we were dealing with somewhere from Persia to Anatolia to Arabia, one asks geographically, why not include other areas of Islam, like Southeast Asia? There's no real condition set down for this other than the material conditions are the same, and I don't think this is true. Can really such a diverse region be lumped into one entity? It can on some levels, perhaps not, but not in the dogmatic way in which he suggests. In terms of chronology, it's non-existent, apart from the narrative, and it's not even an Islamic history that he's talking about. In one important section, for quite a number of pages, he goes back to Sumeria, an ancient Sumeria. And really, is he describing the emergence of Islam if he's talking about a society very different from the Islamic society that existed thousands of years before the Prophet Muhammad? When you're dealing with such broad fields, it largely means that it's devoid of insight. And I think we take, for example, his conclusion about, or his categorization of modern states in the Middle East. And these are centralized rule, protector of communities, and thirdly, sacred right to rule. And these are such broad concepts. Every state has multiple forms of legitimacy. To divide the Middle East, a complex region, into these three is not very helpful, particularly when it looks at the states he lumps in together. For example, under its sacred right to rule, we have Colonel Gaddafi and the Saudi princes. Can we gain any insight from comparing or lumping together a religious monarchy allied to radical Islam, or a radical literal interpretation of Islam, with a secular oligarchy? I really doubt it. This brings me on to my second criticism, which is one of the problems of the book, why such broad evidence is amassed together, is that there isn't really a methodology for straining the evidence. He specifies a hypothesis at the beginning that, as I already stated, it is a clashing between authority and freedom, between the individual and the state, between spiritual equality and religious hierarchy, so on and so forth, that characterizes the Middle East. But there is no real methodology for how he goes about to prove this. Essentially what we have is a collection of evidence which suits his purposes, and little reason why he selected it. This is where I begin to get very worried about the way the book is progressing, is that there are these little flashes in which he says, I saw this on my field work. I came across this in my own studies. And his own studies were limited to a particular Pashtun tribe in Pakistan. And it seems to me that what he's doing is that he is drawing this theoretical veil from this valley in Pakistan and drawing it across the whole Middle East and using it as this way to obscure the complexity, the interesting, fascinating complexity and changes and developments across the whole of the Islamic Middle East from Sumeria up until the present. And really, is this a justified manner of approaching